Hey everyone, ready to unlock some serious language learning secrets?
Oh, I love a good secret, especially when it comes to learning faster and smarter.
Me too! And we've got a gold mine today. Remember that Learn Fast podcast episode you sent over about mastering English quickly?
Yeah, the one with the 10 expert tips. I was hooked from the first minute.
Right. Well, we're taking a deep dive into those tips today, kind of like giving you the cheat codes to fluency. And get this, some of them are seriously outside the box, like ditching textbooks for social media and using celebrities as your language mentors.
Okay, now I'm even more intrigued. Ditching the textbooks. Sign me up.
Right. Let's jump right in. The first tip is all about immersion. They even say, and I quote, read everything you can get your hands on. From classic literature to cereal boxes, newspapers to your Instagram feed. If it's in English, read it.
Wow, that's pretty intense.
It is, right? So what makes that kind of immersion so powerful? Well, I think of it like this. It's like surrounding your brain with the language, right? Creating this like English-speaking bubble around yourself. It's kind of how kids naturally pick up their first language, constant exposure. But there's a catch.
Oh.
Yeah, it's not just about passively letting the words wash over you.
Yeah.
You got to get active. And that's where their second tip comes in. Active reading, taking notes, jotting down new words, like really wrestling with the material.
I've definitely been guilty of just highlighting stuff and calling it a day.
Oh yeah, we've all been there. But think about it. If you just highlight or skim, the information doesn't really stick, right?
That's true. The podcast really hammers home the point of physically writing down the word, its definition, and then get this, actually using it in a sentence. They say it helps solidify it in your memory.
And it totally makes sense, right? That's where we see the power of contextual learning. Your brain needs to see how a word functions in a real life scenario. Like that sentence you write down becomes this little snapshot of how the word is actually used. So it's not just about knowing the dictionary definition, it's about seeing how people use it in real life.
Exactly. Like, for example, you could learn the word ecstatic just by seeing it in a sentence. Like, she was ecstatic when she found out she aced the exam.
Well, that makes so much sense. But they seem to take this whole real life thing a step further with tip number 3, ditch texting and actually talk with real live humans.
Now that's what I'm talking about. Languages, when you get down to it, it's all about communication.
Yeah.
And while reading and writing are super important, nothing beats the spontaneity and the nuance of a good old-fashioned conversation.
They even suggest that if you don't have English-speaking friends nearby, hunt down language exchange partners online or find some cool online communities. Kind of like what we're doing now, but, way more focused on practicing.
Right. It's a great way to get comfortable with the flow of conversation.
So what makes interacting with other speakers so special?
Okay, think of it this way. When you're chatting with someone in real time, you're not just exchanging words. You're picking up on, tone of voice, facial expressions, even body language, right? You start to get a feel for the rhythm and flow of natural English, something that's tough to grasp from a textbook alone.
Oh, so it's like learning the unspoken rules of the language game, those little things that make you sound more natural.
Exactly.
Okay, tip number 4 seems to build on that conversational thing, but with a modern twist. Podcasts and YouTube. They suggest subscribing to channels that match your interests.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and they specifically call out that even if those native accents sound weird at first, sticking with it will help you level up your comprehension big time.
And there's a good reason for that, right? You're basically training your ear to decode different flavors of English, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Podcasts and YouTube offer this incredible buffet of accents and speaking styles. And the more you expose yourself to that variety, the more adaptable your listening skills become.
Like if you watch a movie with different characters from different places, you learn to follow along, even if some accents are tricky at first.
Exactly. And that adaptability is key when you're navigating the real world of English.
All right, this next one, tip number 5, might be a bit more of a commitment, they say, to go abroad.
I mean, who wouldn't want an excuse to travel, right?
Right, exactly. But seriously, what's the language learning benefit of actually being in an English-speaking country?
It's like the ultimate immersion experience, isn't it?
Yeah.
Living and breathing the language 24/7 is like hitting the fast-forward button on your learning journey.
You're just surrounded by it constantly.
You are. And what I find interesting is that it's not just about mastering grammar or vocabulary. It's about soaking up all those intangible aspects of language slang, humor, cultural nuances, things that make you truly feel like you belong.
It's like you were saying before, those unspoken rules of the language game that make you sound more like a native speaker and less like you're reading from a textbook. But for those of us who can't just hop on a plane tomorrow, they suggest checking out online options like language exchange apps or virtual communities.
Yeah.
Kind of a way to get a taste of that immersion without the plane ticket.
And that's what's so amazing about the digital age we live in, right? We can recreate those immersive experiences without even leaving our homes. Technology is a total game changer when it comes to language learning.
Okay, so let's say you've got some English-speaking friends in your life. You lucky dog! Tip number 6 is all about using those relationships to your advantage.
Oh, that's smart.
Right. They basically say, consider your friends your secret weapon.
Love it.
So I'm curious, what are some ways someone could actually do that? How can you turn your friends into language mentors?
Well, just think about how you interact with your friends online, right? Engaging with their social media posts, checking out articles or videos they share. That's a goldmine of authentic English usage right there.
Oh, so it's not just about having conversations.
Yeah.
It's like paying attention to the language they use in all these different contexts.
Yeah.
Exactly. You're learning how native speakers express themselves in, casual everyday situations. It's invaluable.
Almost like having a real-time study guide, but, way more fun.
Right. Because you're invested in those relationships already, it feels natural and enjoyable.
It doesn't even feel like studying.
No, it feels like connecting with people you care about.
Okay, this next tip is about channeling your inner detective. Tip number 7, embrace your inner question asker.
I like that.
I'm guessing this is more than just asking someone, what does this word mean?
You got it. It's about going beyond surface level understanding and digging into the why behind the what. Don't be afraid to pause a podcast and say, wait, why did they use that tense there? Or, message a friend and ask, what's the difference between these two expressions?
I can see how that would be helpful.
The more you question, the deeper your understanding becomes.
It's about not letting those little confusing things just slip by.
Right. And the podcast makes a good point. It doesn't really matter who you ask.
Yeah.
A teacher, a fellow learner, even Google. It's about getting those questions answered and clearing up any confusion.
So it's like building a solid foundation for your understanding.
Exactly.
Now, this next one might sound a little, let's just say unexpected. Tip number 8 is about finding inspiration from celebrities.
Okay, I have to admit, that one caught me off guard a little bit.
I know, right? But hear them out.
All right.
They actually suggest choosing a celebrity you admire and making them your language mentor. Watching interviews, analyzing speeches, even paying attention to their social media posts. It's like turning fandom into a language learning superpower.
So it's about tapping into that existing interest to make learning more engaging.
Exactly. The more you enjoy something, the more you pay attention, right?
Yeah, it's true.
And they point out that different celebrities use different styles of language, so you get exposed to a wider range of vocabulary and expressions.
That's a good point.
I'm imagining someone studying business English by watching interviews with their favorite entrepreneur or picking up fashion terms from a designer's Instagram.
I like that. It reminds us that learning a language doesn't have to be about textbooks and lectures. It can be about connecting with things we're already passionate about.
Absolutely.
That's when the real magic happens, right?
Okay, let's get a little more strategic with tip number 9. They call this one, focus on what you need first.
Sounds practical.
Right.
What's the reasoning behind that?
Well, it's about getting laser focused on the skills and vocabulary that are most relevant to your goals. So imagine someone prepping for a big business presentation versus someone planning a backpacking trip through Europe.
Yeah.
They're going to need different tools in their language toolkit.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The context matters so much.
Right. So instead of trying to learn everything at once, you prioritize what's going to help you communicate effectively in the specific situations you're facing.
So it's like figuring out the 20% of effort that'll get you 80% of the results.
Exactly. And that brings us to the final tip in this batch. Tip number 10, they call this one, be kind to yourself.
Okay, now that's a language learning tip I can get behind.
I know, right? It's so refreshing to hear that.
It is.
They really emphasize the importance of celebrating those small wins, acknowledging the effort you're putting in, and focusing on progress, not perfection.
Because let's face it, language learning can be challenging.
It can.
It's so easy to get discouraged when you hit a roadblock or make mistakes.
Yeah, and they really stress the importance of remembering that everyone learns at their own pace and that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to this.
It's such an important reminder, right?
It is.
It's about finding what works for you, embracing the journey, and most importantly, having fun along the way.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, but don't worry, there are 5 more amazing tips from the Learn Fast podcast coming up in the next part of our deep dive. We'll be right back to explore the rest.
All right, ready to dive back into those language learning tips? I'm really curious about what else the Learn Fast podcast has in store for us.
You and me both. We just wrapped up those first 5 tips that focused on immersion, active learning, and, being kind to ourselves during the process. But now let's shift gears a bit and explore some more, unconventional approaches.
That's good.
Tip number 6 is a really intriguing one. They call it tapping into the power of celebrity inspiration.
Oh, okay. That one definitely caught my eye too when I first saw it. It sounds kind of out there, but I'm definitely open to hearing more.
Right. So how do they actually suggest using celebrities as a language learning tool?
Yeah, I'm curious about that.
Well, they recommend picking an English-speaking actor, singer, or any public figure you really admire, someone whose work you already enjoy, and essentially making them your language mentor.
Okay, I think I see where they're going with this. You're already spending time watching their movies, listening to their music, maybe even following their interviews or social media. So why not turn that into a learning opportunity?
Right, exactly. Instead of just passively enjoying their content, you start actively paying attention to their language. You can take notes on interesting words or phrases, look up definitions, even try imitating their pronunciation or intonation.
Yeah, it's like having a personal language coach who also happens to be a star.
I love that. And let's be real, it's way more motivating to study someone you actually find, engaging and entertaining.
For sure.
It takes the pressure off and makes the process feel more natural.
Yeah, it does.
Plus, they point out that different celebrities use different styles of language, so you get exposed to a wider range of vocabulary and expressions.
That's a good point. It's not just about, textbook English.
Right.
You're getting a taste of how real people use the language in different contexts.
Exactly. I can imagine, someone studying business English by analyzing interviews with their favorite CEO, or maybe someone picking up fashion terms from a designer's Instagram stories.
Totally. It's about personalizing your learning and finding those points of connection that make it feel relevant and exciting.
It's not just studying anymore. It's about engaging with the language in a way that feels authentic and enjoyable.
I like that.
Okay, moving on to tip number 7. This one seems to build on the idea of active learning, but with a focus on, wait for it, questions. They call it embrace your inner question asker. And I have a feeling this goes beyond just asking someone, what does this word mean?
Oh, yeah, I think I know what you mean. It's about that, that deeper level of engagement,
right.
Not just accepting information at face value, but really digging in.
Exactly.
So, if you're reading an article and come across a phrase you don't quite understand, don't just gloss over it. Pause, look it up, make sure you really grasp its meaning and how it's being used in that context.
I can see how that would be helpful, really taking the time to fully understand things.
It makes a big difference. And the podcast actually emphasizes that it doesn't matter who you ask, whether it's a teacher, a fellow learner, even good old Google.
It's about taking initiative.
It is. It's about taking ownership of your learning and seeking out those answers.
So you're not just passively waiting for someone to explain things to you.
Exactly. And here's why I think this is so important. Learning is about building connections in your mind, right? Creating a mental framework for understanding.
Yeah.
And when we leave gaps in that framework, unanswered questions, concepts we haven't fully grasped, it weakens the whole structure.
It's like building a house on a foundation with cracks.
Exactly. You need that solid foundation to really build your understanding.
Okay, so we've talked about immersion, active learning, being kind to ourselves. Now, tip number 8 seems to shift gears toward a more strategic approach.
Okay, how so?
They call it focus on what you need first.
I mean, that makes sense, right? Prioritize what's most important.
Exactly. It's all about efficiency and maximizing your learning efforts. So, imagine someone is preparing for a high-stakes business negotiation, right?
Okay.
Versus someone planning a backpacking trip through, Southeast Asia. The language skills they need to prioritize are going to be totally different.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So the business person might need to focus on formal language, industry jargon, persuasive techniques, while the backpacker might need to prioritize conversational phrases, travel vocabulary, maybe even some basic slang.
Makes sense. Different situations call for different tools.
Exactly. It's about identifying your specific goals and then tailoring your learning accordingly. So instead of trying to learn everything at once, you focus on the skills and vocabulary that will have the most immediate impact on your ability to communicate effectively in the situations you're most likely to encounter.
Right. It's like that 80-20 rule, right?
Yeah.
Figure out the 20% of effort that will give you 80% of the results and focus your energy there.
Exactly. It's about being strategic and intentional with your learning, not just, blindly following a textbook or course syllabus.
Yeah. You got to be smart about it.
All right, so speaking of going beyond textbooks, tip number 9 is all about embrace real-world experiences.
I like that one. Getting out there and actually using the language.
Right.
So what are their suggestions for doing that?
Well, they do mention going abroad as like the ultimate real-world experience,
Oh, for sure.
but they acknowledge that it's not always, feasible for everyone.
Yeah, not everyone can just pick up and travel.
Right. But
Yeah.
they emphasize that even if you can't physically travel to an English-speaking country, there are still tons of ways to recreate that immersive environment.
Okay, good. Like what are some ideas?
Think about all the amazing online resources available, right?
Yeah.
Like language exchange apps, virtual communities, online forums, even just interacting with native speakers on social media.
Right. Those are great ways to get exposure to the language
Exactly.
and practice your skills.
It's amazing how technology is breaking down barriers and making language learning more accessible than ever before.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
You don't have to be stuck in a classroom anymore.
It's pretty cool. You can literally carry a world of language learning resources in your pocket.
That's so true. Okay, what about the last tip? What's number 10?
All right, tip number 10 brings us back to the importance of mindset, and they call this one, embrace the journey.
Okay, I like that. It's about the process, not just the destination.
You got it. It's about recognizing that language learning is a process, a journey with its own, ups and downs, twists and turns.
There are going to be bumps along the way, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's about enjoying the ride.
Exactly. It's so easy to get caught up in the pressure of achieving fluency, of reaching some arbitrary level of perfection.
Yeah, we can be so hard on ourselves.
But the truth is, language learning is a lifelong pursuit, right? There's always more to learn, more to discover, more to refine.
It never really ends.
Exactly. And they really emphasize the importance of celebrating those small wins along the way, like mastering a new grammar rule or holding a conversation without getting flustered or understanding a movie without subtitles.
Those are big wins for sure.
They are, right. They're worth celebrating.
Yeah.
It's about acknowledging your effort and appreciating how far you've come. And just as importantly, it's about being kind to yourself when you inevitably, stumble.
Yeah, you got to give yourself permission to make mistakes.
Because they're going to happen.
Oh, they definitely will. We all make them.
Right. It's part of the process.
Exactly. The key is to see those mistakes as opportunities to learn, not as failures.
I think that's such a powerful message.
It is. Language learning is a journey, not a race. It's about embracing the process, celebrating the small wins, and never losing sight of the joy of discovery.
I love that. Okay, we've officially dissected all 10 tips from the Learn Fast podcast episode. I'm feeling pretty inspired.
Me too. It's amazing how many gems we can uncover just from one podcast episode when we take the time to really, dive deep.
And now it's time to turn it over to you, the listener.
Yeah, we've shared a lot of information, but now it's your turn to reflect and connect these tips to your own language learning journey.
Wow, we just covered so much ground with those 10 tips from the Learn Fast podcast.
I know, right? It's amazing how much there is to unpack when it comes to learning English effectively.
What really stood out to me was the focus on making language learning fun and personalized.
Yeah, it's a far cry from the old school methods of just memorizing grammar rules and vocabulary lists.
Totally. It's about finding those approaches that genuinely excite you and make you want to keep coming back for more.
Exactly. Whether it's, connecting with native speakers online or analyzing interviews with your favorite celebrity or immersing yourself in podcasts and YouTube channels that align with your interest, there are so many ways to make learning feel less like a chore and more like a natural part of your day.
It's about finding that sweet spot where learning and enjoyment intersect.
Absolutely. And when you're genuinely engaged and having fun, it fuels your motivation, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It helps you stick with it, even when things get challenging.
Which, let's face it, they inevitably will.
Oh, yeah, there will be bumps along the road, for sure.
So how do these tips address those challenges that come up when learning a new language?
Well, that's where those mindset tips come into play, right? Remember, be kind to yourself and embrace the journey. It's so easy to get discouraged when you hit a plateau or make mistakes.
It happens to everyone.
It does. But if you can shift your perspective and view those challenges as opportunities to learn and grow, it makes a huge difference.
It's about focusing on the progress you're making, not striving for some unattainable perfection.
Exactly. And giving yourself permission to stumble along the way.
We're all human, after all.
We are. And we learn best when we approach the process with a sense of curiosity and self-compassion.
I love that. It's like giving yourself the same encouragement and support you'd offer a friend.
Exactly. We tend to be much harder on ourselves than we would ever be on anyone else.
So true. Okay, we've explored all these amazing tips, but now it's time to put them into action.
Yeah, let's talk about what our listeners can do right now to take that first step.
Exactly. Now that you've got all these tools in your toolkit, what's one action you can take today to jumpstart your English learning journey?
That's a great question. And I think it's important to emphasize that there's no single right answer.
It's about finding what works best for you.
Exactly. It could be something as simple as subscribing to a new English language podcast, or connecting with a language exchange partner, or even just committing to reading one English article every day.
It doesn't have to be a huge time commitment.
No, not at all. Even small actions can add up over time.
The key is to just start somewhere, right? Take that first step and build from there.
Exactly. It's amazing how much momentum you can create by simply taking action.
Well said. I think that wraps up our deep dive into the world of learning English quickly.
It's been a fascinating exploration for sure.
And a reminder that learning a new language can be both challenging and incredibly rewarding.
It is, and it's a journey that's worth taking.
Absolutely. So to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep growing, and keep those language adventures going.